Today I'm going to expose 5 foods that are marketed as heart healthy, that doctors often recommend, and that millions of people over 60 eat every single day, thinking they're protecting their cardiovascular system, when in reality, these foods are quietly damaging their heart, raising their blood pressure, increasing inflammation in their arteries, and accelerating the progression toward heart disease. I'm a physician who has specialized in cardiovascular medicine and preventive cardiology for over 25 years. And what I'm about to share with you is going to shock you, because these are foods that appear on every heart-healthy list. Foods that are sold in the health food section. Foods that have labels screaming about their benefits. But when you understand the biochemistry of aging and how your cardiovascular system changes after 60, you'll see why these foods that might have been perfectly fine when you were 40 or 50 become problematic as you get older. If you care about your heart health, if you want to avoid a heart attack or stroke, and if you've been following conventional dietary advice that isn't working, this video could transform your approach to nutrition. Here's what most people don't understand about nutrition and aging. Your body at 65 is fundamentally different from your body at 45. Your metabolism has slowed down by 20 to 30%, which means you burn calories differently and store fat more easily, particularly dangerous visceral fat around your organs. Your ability to process certain nutrients has changed. Your gut microbiome has shifted, affecting how you digest and absorb foods. Your blood vessels have lost elasticity, making them more vulnerable to inflammation and damage. Your pancreas produces insulin less efficiently, making you more prone to blood sugar spikes. Your kidneys filter sodium and other minerals less effectively, making you more sensitive to salt and other compounds that affect blood pressure. All of these age-related changes mean that foods which were neutral or even beneficial when you were younger can become harmful after 60. The food industry, and even many well-meaning nutritionists, don't account for these differences when they make blanket recommendations about what's healthy. Let me establish my credentials before I reveal these 5 foods. I'm a board-certified cardiologist with over 2 decades of experience treating patients with heart disease, hypertension, and metabolic syndrome. I've conducted clinical research on nutrition and cardiovascular health. I've published papers in peer-reviewed medical journals on dietary interventions for heart disease prevention. And I've worked with thousands of patients over 60 to optimize their diets for cardiovascular health. What I'm sharing today isn't based on fads or trends. It's based on biochemistry, clinical studies, and real-world outcomes I've observed in my practice. I've seen patients who were doing everything right according to conventional advice, eating all the healthy foods they'd been told to eat, and yet their cholesterol was climbing, their blood pressure was creeping up, and their coronary calcium scores were worsening. When we identified and eliminated these 5 foods from their diets and replaced them with truly heart-protective alternatives, their markers improved dramatically. The first food on this list is going to surprise you because it's been promoted as a health food for decades. I'm talking about whole wheat bread and whole grain products. Now, before you click away thinking I'm promoting some anti-grain fad diet, hear me out. The problem isn't that whole grains are inherently bad. The problem is what modern industrial food processing has done to wheat and how your aging body responds to it. Modern wheat has been hybridized and modified over the past 50 years to increase yield and improve baking properties. And in the process, the protein structure has changed. This modern wheat contains forms of gluten and other proteins that trigger inflammation more readily than ancient varieties. For people over 60, whose inflammatory systems are already running hotter because of age-related changes, this additional inflammatory trigger can be significant. Here's the mechanism. When you eat whole wheat bread, even if it's organic, sprouted, or marketed as healthy, the complex carbohydrates break down into glucose faster than you'd think. The glycemic index of whole wheat bread is actually similar to white bread, around 70 to 75, which means it spikes your blood sugar rapidly. These blood sugar spikes cause your pancreas to release large amounts of insulin, and chronic high insulin levels promote fat storage, particularly around your abdomen, increase inflammation in your arterial walls, and over time contribute to insulin resistance and metabolic syndrome. A study published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition followed over 3,000 adults aged 60 and older for 5 years and found that those who consumed 3 or more servings of whole grain products daily had higher levels of inflammatory markers, including C-reactive protein and interleukin-6, compared to those who limited grain consumption. These inflammatory markers are directly linked to increased cardiovascular disease risk. I've had patients eliminate wheat products from their diets and see their triglycerides drop by 50 points, their blood pressure decrease by 10 to 15 points, and their waist circumference shrink by 2 to 3 inches within 3 months. The second food is one that appears on every heart-healthy shopping list, and that's low-fat yogurt or fat-free yogurt. The low-fat craze that started in the 1980s convinced millions of people that dietary fat causes heart disease, and the food industry responded by creating thousands of low-fat and fat-free products. But here's what they don't tell you. When you remove fat from yogurt, you remove the satiety, the satisfaction, the creamy texture that makes yogurt enjoyable. To compensate, manufacturers add sugar, artificial sweeteners, thickeners, stabilizers, and fruit flavoring that's often just high fructose corn syrup with artificial colors. A typical serving of low-fat fruit yogurt contains 20 to 30 grams of sugar, which is equivalent to eating 5 to 7 teaspoons of pure sugar. For someone over 60 whose insulin sensitivity is already compromised, this sugar bomb causes massive blood sugar and insulin spikes that promote inflammation, triglyceride production, and fat accumulation. But there's another problem specific to older adults. The artificial sweeteners often used in light or sugar-free yogurt, including sucralose and aspartame, have been shown in recent research to alter gut bacteria in ways that promote insulin resistance and may increase cardiovascular risk. A study in the journal Nature followed over 100,000 adults and found that people who regularly consumed artificial sweeteners had a 9% higher risk of cardiovascular events including heart attack and stroke. The mechanism appears to involve disruption of the gut microbiome, which affects everything from inflammation to blood pressure regulation. What you should be eating instead is full-fat, plain yogurt, preferably from grass-fed sources if you can access it. The natural fats in full-fat yogurt actually slow the absorption of the milk sugars, provide important fat-soluble vitamins like K2, which is protective for arteries, and keep you satisfied so you don't overeat later. The third food is vegetable oil, particularly the oils marketed as heart-healthy, like soybean oil, corn oil, sunflower oil, and canola oil. These oils are everywhere. They're in salad dressings, in packaged foods, in restaurant cooking, and they are recommended by major health organizations as better alternatives to saturated fats like butter or coconut oil. But the science on vegetable oils and heart health has shifted dramatically, and what we now know is that these oils are particularly problematic for people over 60. The issue is that these oils are extremely high in omega-6 fatty acids, and when omega-6 consumption is too high relative to omega-3 fatty acids, it creates a pro-inflammatory state in your body. Your cardiovascular system at 60 is already dealing with chronic low-grade inflammation, what we call inflammaging, and adding fuel to that fire with high omega-6 oils accelerates arterial damage. There's also the problem of how these oils are processed. Vegetable oils are extracted using high heat, chemical solvents like hexane, and bleaching and deodorizing processes that create oxidized lipids and trans fats, even in oils labeled as trans fat-free. When you consume oxidized lipids, they contribute directly to atherosclerosis by embedding themselves in your arterial walls and triggering immune responses that lead to plaque formation. A landmark study published in the British Medical Journal reanalyzed data from old clinical trials and found that when people replaced saturated fats with vegetable oils high in omega-6, their risk of death from heart disease actually increased, not decreased. The researchers suggested that the oxidation products and inflammatory effects of these oils outweigh any theoretical benefit from lowering LDL cholesterol. I advise my patients over 60 to completely eliminate soybean, corn, and sunflower oils, and instead use extra virgin olive oil, avocado oil, or even moderate amounts of butter or ghee from grass-fed sources. The fourth food is going to be controversial, and that's orange juice and fruit juice in general. For decades, orange juice has been promoted as part of a healthy breakfast, a good source of vitamin C, and a way to start your day with fruit. But when you understand what fruit juice does to your metabolism, especially after 60, you'll see why it's one of the worst things you can consume for your heart. When you juice an orange, you remove all the fiber that would normally slow the absorption of the fruit's sugar. What you're left with is essentially sugar water with some vitamins. An 8-ounce glass of orange juice contains about 21 grams of sugar, which is nearly as much as a can of Coca-Cola. When you drink that juice on an empty stomach, which is what most people do at breakfast, you get a massive spike in blood glucose and insulin. For someone over 60 whose pancreas is less responsive and whose cells are more insulin resistant, this daily assault promotes the development of type 2 diabetes, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and cardiovascular disease. There's a specific mechanism I need to explain about fructose, which makes up about half the sugar in fruit juice. Fructose is metabolized exclusively in the liver, and when you consume large amounts, your liver converts it directly to triglycerides and VLDL cholesterol, which are the most dangerous types of blood fats for your heart. A study in the Journal of the American Medical Association followed over 13,000 adults and found that people who consumed one or more servings of fruit juice daily had a 24% higher risk of developing coronary heart disease compared to those who consumed juice less than once a month. The researchers specifically noted that the risk was highest in adults over 60. I've had patients who thought they were being healthy by drinking fresh squeezed orange juice every morning, and when we stopped the juice and had them eat a whole orange instead, their triglycerides dropped by 40 to 60 points, and their fasting blood sugar normalized. The fifth and final food is one that might make you angry because it's been so heavily marketed to seniors, and that's multi-grain or whole grain breakfast cereal. We're talking about cereals like Cheerios, Raisin Bran, Special K, and even the more expensive brands sold in health food stores, with labels promising heart health, cholesterol reduction, and whole grain goodness. These cereals are nutritional disasters for people over 60. First, they're made primarily from processed grains that have been pulverized into flour, which means they digest rapidly and spike your blood sugar just like pure sugar. Second, they're loaded with added sugars even when they claim to be healthy. A serving of Raisin Bran contains 18 grams of sugar. Honey Nut Cheerios has 12 grams. Even plain Cheerios, which seem innocent, cause blood sugar spikes because of the processed oat flour. Third, these cereals are fortified with synthetic vitamins and minerals, and there's emerging evidence that some of these synthetic nutrients, particularly iron in fortified cereals, may contribute to oxidative stress and cardiovascular risk in older adults who already have adequate iron stores. Iron is a pro-oxidant, meaning it generates free radicals that damage cells, and men over 60 and postmenopausal women don't need additional iron. A study in the European Heart Journal found that elevated iron levels, often from fortified foods, were associated with increased risk of heart attack in older adults. Fourth, these cereals are almost always consumed with milk or milk substitutes, and often with additional fruit, creating a breakfast that's essentially a sugar bomb wrapped in a health halo. I've worked with patients who were eating whole grain cereal every morning, thinking they were doing their heart a favor, and when we switched them to a breakfast of eggs with vegetables or Greek yogurt with nuts and berries, their energy levels improved, their blood sugar stabilized, and their cardiovascular risk markers measurably improved. Now that you know which foods to avoid, let me tell you what you should be eating, instead to truly protect your heart after 60. The foundation of a heart-healthy diet for older adults should be whole, unprocessed foods that don't spike your blood sugar, that provide anti-inflammatory fats, and that deliver nutrients in their natural forms. Start your day with protein and healthy fat instead of carbohydrates. Eggs are an excellent choice despite decades of misguided fear-mongering about cholesterol. The cholesterol in eggs doesn't significantly raise blood cholesterol in most people, and eggs provide high-quality protein, choline for brain health, and lutein for eye health. Cook them in butter or olive oil, with vegetables like spinach, tomatoes, or mushrooms. Alternatively, have full-fat Greek yogurt with a handful of nuts and a few berries. The key is to avoid the blood sugar spike that comes from starting your day with juice, cereal, or bread. For your main meals, focus on fatty fish like salmon, sardines, and mackerel, which provide omega-3 fatty acids that directly reduce inflammation and protect your cardiovascular system. Include plenty of non-starchy vegetables, which provide fiber, antioxidants, and compounds that support healthy blood pressure and arterial function. Use extra virgin olive oil liberally. Studies on Mediterranean populations show that people who consume 4 to 5 tablespoons of olive oil daily have dramatically lower rates of heart disease. Don't fear saturated fat from natural sources like grass-fed butter, full-fat dairy, and meat, but do eliminate processed foods, added sugars, and industrial seed oils. Let me address the elephant in the room. which is that what I'm recommending contradicts advice that organizations like the American Heart Association have been giving for decades. Why should you trust me over these established authorities? The answer is that nutritional science has evolved dramatically, and institutional recommendations are often 10 to 20 years behind the current research because changing official guidelines is a slow, politically complicated process involving multiple stakeholders, including food industry interests. The low-fat, high-carb diet that was promoted starting in the 1980s was based on flawed science and has contributed to the epidemics of obesity, diabetes, and heart disease we're experiencing today. New research, particularly studies looking specifically at older adults rather than extrapolating from younger populations, clearly shows that the dietary advice that dominated the last 40 years is wrong for people over 60. Your body needs different nutrients and responds differently to foods than it did when you were younger. Let me give you a practical example from my practice. I had a 68-year-old patient, I'll call him Robert, who came to me with high blood pressure, elevated triglycerides, a thick waist, and early signs of coronary artery disease on his calcium score. He'd been following a low-fat diet recommended by his previous doctor, eating whole grain cereal for breakfast, whole wheat bread sandwiches for lunch, low-fat yogurt as snacks, drinking orange juice daily, and cooking with vegetable oil. He was exercising regularly and taking his medications, but his numbers kept getting worse. I explained to him the principles I've shared with you today and helped him transition to a diet focused on eggs and vegetables for breakfast, salads with olive oil and protein for lunch, fatty fish or grass-fed meat with vegetables for dinner, and full-fat yogurt with nuts for snacks. We eliminated the orange juice, the whole grain products, the low-fat processed foods, and the vegetable oils. Within 3 months, his triglycerides dropped from 280 to 120. His blood pressure came down from 145/90 to 125/78. He lost 15 pounds, and he reported feeling more energetic and mentally clear than he had in years. 6 months later, we repeated his coronary calcium score, and it had stabilized, whereas before, it had been increasing annually. Here's your action plan. Go through your kitchen and identify these 5 categories of foods: whole grain and wheat products, low-fat and fat-free dairy products, vegetable oils like soybean and corn oil, fruit juices, and breakfast cereals. Start by eliminating 1 category per week so you're not overwhelming yourself. Replace whole grain bread with vegetables or sweet potatoes. Replace low-fat yogurt with full-fat plain yogurt. Replace vegetable oils with olive oil or avocado oil. Replace orange juice with whole fruit, or just skip it entirely. Replace breakfast cereal with eggs and vegetables or full-fat yogurt with nuts. Track your results. Monitor your blood pressure at home. Pay attention to how you feel. Notice if your energy is more stable throughout the day, and work with your doctor to track your blood work, including triglycerides, fasting blood sugar, and inflammatory markers. I also want to emphasize that this isn't about perfection. You don't have to eliminate every trace of these foods forever. The goal is to make them the exception, rather than the daily staples they've become for so many people. If you're at a restaurant and the only option is a sandwich on whole wheat bread, it's fine to eat it occasionally. What's damaging is eating these foods multiple times every single day, which is what millions of people over 60 are doing because they've been told these are healthy choices. The cumulative effect of consuming inflammatory, blood sugar spiking foods day after day, year after year, is what creates the chronic metabolic dysfunction that leads to heart disease. Let me address one more point about why this information isn't more widely known. The food industry is a $1 trillion business, and entire categories of products would disappear if people stopped buying low-fat yogurt, vegetable oils, fruit juices, breakfast cereals, and whole grain products. These companies fund research, sponsor professional organizations, advertise heavily, and lobby against any information that threatens their market. This isn't conspiracy theory, it's documented fact. Major cereal companies have funded studies trying to show that breakfast cereal is healthy. Vegetable oil producers have funded research promoting their products as heart healthy. The sugar industry famously paid Harvard researchers in the 1960s to publish papers blaming saturated fat for heart disease while downplaying sugar's role. When you understand these conflicts of interest, you realize that you can't simply trust what's on the package label or what's promoted as healthy. Here's the bottom line. After 60, Your body needs nutrient-dense, anti-inflammatory foods that stabilize blood sugar, provide healthy fats, and don't trigger the metabolic chaos that comes from processed carbohydrates and industrial oils. The 5 foods I've exposed today, whole wheat bread and whole grains, low-fat yogurt, vegetable oils, fruit juice and breakfast cereals, are marketed as heart-healthy, but actually work against your cardiovascular system because of how they affect blood sugar, inflammation, and lipid metabolism in aging bodies. By eliminating these foods and replacing them with real, whole foods like eggs, fatty fish, full-fat dairy, olive oil, and non-starchy vegetables, you can dramatically improve your cardiovascular risk profile, stabilize your blood sugar, reduce inflammation, and feel better. You deserve to know the truth about what's actually healthy for your heart, not what the food industry and outdated nutritional guidelines claim is healthy. Take control of your diet, make informed choices, and watch your heart health transform. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video where we'll talk about the best heart protective foods you should be eating every single day. Take care of that heart.